watching News 24 Live. It's Monday, the 29th of June. I'm joined in studio this morning by our Sport 24 team, editor Garen Lamley and chief writer Rob Howing. We're going to hear their thoughts and reaction on the Springbok squad that was announced over the weekend, and then also touch on the Super Rugby semi-final results. Gents, good morning to you. Thanks for coming in.
Morning, Nick.
Welcome back, Garen.
Thanks very much.
So, gents, well, Rob, I'm going to start with you. What was your initial reaction to the Springbok announcement? Obviously, it's an extended squad. I'm guessing it will be whittled down somewhat closer to the Rugby Championship. But yeah, new caps, any surprise omissions, inclusions?
The first surprise for me was that it's still a very, as you say, an enlarged squad. So when you pick a squad of 49, it's very difficult to know where your thoughts should lie because there are so many players there who may disappear still off the radar, even if they've been included for the moment. For me, for instance, a big mystery would be someone like Heyneke, who we all thought was way out of favour with Heyneke Meyer, and then has found himself back in the mix, at least in terms of this provisional squad. The other thing that clouds the whole situation is that you've got, he picked a squad of 36, which I presume means he's talking players who are basically match ready. In other words, he can start thinking about quite confidently in terms of their fitness for the World 15 game, for instance, which will be quite a useful sort of experimental exercise. But you've got another 13 players who are in what's been described as an injured/conditioning squad. So that's players who are either recently injured and are just beginning rehab, others who are going through conditioning and supposedly will be ready to filter into the plan. So it's all a little bit confusing. For me, quite significant was two Bulls players getting the shaft. Piers Spies is now right out of favour. That's quite a spectacular fall from grace when you're looking at a squad of 49. And that tells you that, and I agree with it 100%, because I think Spies was pretty awful for the Bulls this year. He was supposed to be one of those guys who led by example. The Bulls imploded in the last part of the Super Rugby season, and of course Francois Hougaard has also been given the heave-ho, which is interesting given his versatility value, because of course he can serve an extended squad, especially when you go overseas. Very useful guy to have around as a wing option as well as a scrum-half option. So those were sort of particularly significant sort of thoughts that I had, but it's still a very confusing situation because so much is still going to happen before that squad gets quite significantly whittled down.
Speaking of Scrum-half, Heyneke Meyer is obviously trying some new options at number 9, Garen. So new caps include Faf de Klerk, Rudy Page. All of the new caps, I'm just going to read them out: Scarron Tabeni, Stephen Kitsoff, Vincent Koch, the two I mentioned, Jesse Creel, Franco Mostert, and Lionel Mapu. What did you make of those new caps?
You know, for me, the most pleasing thing is that Heineke's rewarded Super Rugby form. Those players you mentioned, they've all stood out in Super Rugby this year. The Stormers, basically their front row, a couple of Lions players who really performed for them. So he's rewarded them. But again, as Rob says, they're all in the squad of effectively 49. It has to drop to 31 for the World Cup. So you're going to lose 18 players. He's got 5 scrum halves. I don't think he'll take more than 3. You know, had he picked Francois Hougaard, he would have at least doubled as a scrum half and a wing. But he's got 5 out-and-out scrum halves. So I think at most he'll take 3. Obviously, when you're thinking 31 players in a 15-man team, it's only two in each position. So you're looking for those versatile utility-type players who can cover, you know, wing and centre, or inside and outside centre, or perhaps fullback and wing, or even in Hougaard's case, scrum half and wing. But he's going to have to get rid of a couple. So I fear it's going to be your Rudy Pages and your Faf de Klerks, who have been rewarded for Super Rugby form, but are going to fall at the wayside at the expense of players like Fourie du Preez with his experience, and Ruan Pienaar, and even who's the Sharks Cobus Reiner, who's played for South Africa already. Having said that, we've just learned that Fourie du Preez has picked up a knee injury. In training with his Japanese team, he's out between 4 and 8 weeks, which pretty much rules him out of the World 15 match, plus a few Currie Cup warm-up matches if he was ever going to play there, as well as the start of the Rugby Championship, perhaps even the whole tournament, even because it's a shortened version this year. He might just stay in South Africa, wait for the Boks to return and play against that Argentina match, which they've sort of added at the end. So there's a doubt over him. Obviously that brings Ruan Pienaar in as the likely starter. He's not everyone's favourite, let's just say. but it looks like he's gonna play there. So yeah, it's difficult to read too much into the squad. You know, everyone's around the world are naming these massive squads. They've all got these sort of friendlies coming up ahead of the Rugby Championship. So you're going to see a lot of players dropping by the wayside, and we're probably going to end up with our experienced team, the tried and tested bunch that Heyneke is going to put faith in for the Rugby World Cup, and then Super Rugby form unfortunately is going to perhaps be overlooked at the end of the day.
Speaking of Farid Apria, Rob, obviously Heyneke Meyer has stuck to his guns by picking informed overseas-based players. What are your thoughts on the inclusion of likes like Jacques Farid, Zane Kirshner, etc.?
I suppose in the case of someone like Kirshner, the fact that he's been playing a lot of rugby in the Northern Hemisphere makes him a fairly safe sort of candidate. I know he's another player who arouses quite strong emotions in this country. Some people feel that the way ahead for Springbok rugby is certainly not by fielding someone like Zane Kirshner, who we all know has quite strong defensive merits, but is rather predictable on the attack. And you'd like to think that South Africa are going to try, at least to some extent, to evolve their game plan to match the sort of high pace that we're seeing from especially some of the Australasian sides in Super Rugby, and presumably which will translate onto the international stage as well. Again, it may just be a sort of hedging his bets at this stage, looking at depth before he starts culling. I find it hard to imagine that Kirshner will get in ahead of, for instance, people like, you've got your Willie Leroux. I'm very happy that Jesse Creel is in the mix.
Jaco Creel.
No, that was a little bit of a disappointment. Jaco Creel has been an outstanding tearaway loose forward for the Lions this year, a player with real X factor. I suppose you could say, where does he really fit in? Because he's not your sort of classic out-and-out fetcher, and he's not your out-and-out sort of tough blindsider. He's really a sort of marauding kind of almost like a flashback to a sort of a Rob Lowe type of thrill factor, running in space and so on. Lots of pace. So a bit of a shame that he didn't make it, but there is still, there are other elements of the loose trio that give us plenty of cause for optimism. We know that loose forward is not exactly an area where South Africa, suffer too much angst. We know we've got lots of quality there, and on slightly sort of slower surfaces, potentially in England at a World Cup, guys like Francois Lowe, Marcel Coetzee, Dwayne Vermeulen and Skalkberger, those guys are all going to come into their own, you would think, for sort of tournament rugby, if you like, at a World Cup. So not too many worries, although I am disappointed about Jaco Creel, I must say.